Okay, since there's been a complete and total media censorship on the protests in France, I figured I would go ahead and read the list of demands from the protesters in France and also insert a few of my own opinions on there as well. Let me turn off my notifications there so I don't get bothered by anybody. Um, First is a constitutional cap on taxes at 25%. France has extremely brutal taxes. By some estimates, they're paying between 50 and 60 or even 70% of their income goes towards taxes. So that is, it is about taxes. That is one of the number one things on the list. But as you'll see as I continue to read this list, it's not just about taxes. And I agree with that for our country as well. I mean, we are paying taxes, especially here in California. It's absolutely insane the level of taxation that we're paying. And most of the taxes go to government programs that aren't actually improving society or helping the poor or anything. So most of them are pretty negative. It just ends up corruption and graft and lining more politicians and their corporate partners' pockets. So yeah, I definitely agree with them on that in this country as well. Increase of 40% in the basic pension and social welfare. It's interesting that they would have the cap on taxes and then also talk about basic pension and social welfare. I'm not sure I agree with them on that one. It doesn't seem like that's going to work. Increase hiring in public sector to reestablish public services. Yeah, that's probably a good idea. I know they've had a lot of issues in that country recently with infrastructure issues. But again, I'm less taxes, less government services kind of guy myself personally. But, whatever. Massive construction projects to house 5 million homeless and severe penalties for mayors' prefectures that leave people on the streets. They have a severe problem over there because they've imported so many migrants there that, the tax-paying people are paying for, 3 times more people than are paying into the system. So, of course, there's going to be a huge issue with that. And while I agree that they, need to do something to get the people off the streets and into housing, I'm not sure massive construction projects run by the government is the best idea. Just my thought out loud. Break up the too big to fail banks, reseparate regular banking from investment banking. This is absolutely one of their most important core demands, in my opinion. This is exactly what led to the 2008 financial crash here in this country. One of the things, there were a number of things that created that perfect storm, but definitely the investment banking and regular banking being one giant monolithic system was definitely a big part of the problem. Cancel debts accrued through usurious rates of interest. Well, I'm actually kind of down with that. I disagree with usury 100%. I think usury is immoral. I kind of follow the biblical rule on that. Usury is very frowned upon by Jesus in the Bible, and it's interesting that so many people think that usury is an okay thing and an okay thing to invest in for themselves, and it's like, you are exploiting from the poor. That's the rich directly exploiting from the poor, exploiting the poor and extorting money from the poor. That's what usury is. So, constitutional amendments to protect the people's interests, including binding referenda. Yeah, I'm not sure what they're really asking for there. That's pretty vague, but, I'm sure at this point corporations are raping and pillaging their country just like they are here. That's my guess. It has something to do with that. The barring of lobby groups and vested interests from political decision making. Yeah, well, hello. You can't have a, quote, representational, quote, democracy when the only people being represented are corporations and giant multi-billion-dollar banks, which is definitely the case there, which is why these people are upset, and also the case here, and also in most of the Western world at this point. Unless we eliminate the giant corporations and banks from our political process, we're going to see this kind of violence and chaos everywhere, not just in France, but everywhere. Frexit, leave the EU to regain our economic, monetary, and political sovereignty. In other words, respect the 2005 referendum result when France voted against the EU Constitution Treaty, which was then renamed the Lisbon Treaty, and the French people were ignored. Yeah, obviously, like, I don't think even national governments are too monolithic and too much of an abuse of individuals and families, in my opinion. Certainly, when you get into like a meta government like the EU or the UN or NATO or any of those, you're removing the power from the people and putting it even farther away from the people. So, of course, the people are going to get screwed. And that's exactly what's happening in the EU. And, they want to do it here with the North American Union, too. And I think we need to break up the USA. I'd like to see not even just at the state level, but maybe even at the county level. I think, imagine if every county was its own country with its own laws and constitution, and the people in each county could, freely determine their own course of action. I think we'd see a massive development of human liberty and freedom and human health, all kinds of things, if we were to actually decentralize government and get rid of these giant federal governments that are obviously horrible for the populace, and certainly get rid of these meta governments like the EU and the UN and the International Monetary Fund. All these kind of things are, the bigger the government, the worse it is for the people. So yeah, I would really like to see not only France leave the EU, but maybe France itself break up and not be a giant country, but each county in France be its own country. Just think what that would do for the local people over the long term. I think it'd be very, very beneficial for everybody. Clamp down on tax evasion by the ultra rich. Yeah, that's going to be a problem no matter what. Rich people have the resources and means to run better spreadsheets than poor people, and to find ways to avoid paying taxes. That's just always going to happen. I think a much bigger issue is the corporate tax evasion and the big corporate bank tax evasion. Probably a much bigger issue than the ultra rich. But yeah, I feel what they're feeling in spirit. It's just, I don't know. I think the answer is less taxes in general, especially for the poor people. The immediate cessation of privatization and the renationalization of public goods like motorways, airports, rail, etc. Yeah, that's another thing I've definitely noticed in this country. I mean, rich people have nicer houses, nicer clothes, nicer cars, but better internet. And now we're giving them toll roads, so rich people have better roads too, making it possible for them to continually ignore the problems that our society is having, and also to further exploit the poorer classes. And, and do so without having to, see any of the effects of that exploitation. So, yeah, I think that, rich people should at least have to drive on the same roads that we do, and fly in the same airports that we do, etc. That's a good point there. Removing all ideology from the Ministry of Education, ending all destructive educational techniques. Yeah, boy, having worked in education here in this country, boy, would I like to see that. I mean, the insane narrative that most of the schools and high schools and colleges are teaching kids now it's just so, it's not only is it false and misleading, it's just 100% antithetical to human health and happiness. I mean, the stuff they're teaching in schools now is so destructive. So yeah, I definitely feel with them on that. Quadruple the budget for law and order and put time limits on judicial procedures. Make access to the justice system available for all. Yeah, I don't know about quadrupling the budget for law and order and then simultaneously lowering taxes. That doesn't make any sense. But, hey, how about a Second Amendment? Give everybody a pistol and see if people don't clean up their acts right away. An armed society is a polite society. So, sorry, protesters. I think you've been living as a cuckolded European, pathetic, less than human for too long, and you don't even understand what you actually need there. What you need is the Second Amendment, and you need to be packing your own pistols. So that's just the way it goes. Anybody who disagrees just hasn't done enough research on it or read the statistics on that. So sorry, protesters. I'm going to have to hard disagree with you on that one. Spending more money on cops is not going to help. Break up media monopolies and end their interference in politics. Make media accessible to citizens and guarantee a plurality of opinions. End editorial propaganda. Definitely breaking up the media monopolies. Maybe breaking up all the corporate monopolies. Maybe ending corporations altogether and making sure that everything is a small family-owned business. That would be really, really great for the whole economy and for everybody, and absolutely would probably solve every issue they're talking about. But especially in the media, that's certainly important. Into editorial propaganda, that sounds like a potential First Amendment violation for me, freedom of speech issue. I don't think you're ever going to be able to end editorial propaganda. Personally, that just seems like a silly silly demand. Sorry I keep moving the screen around, but this thing will go on screensaver and shut down if I don't. So, yeah, definitely getting rid of the big giant corporate media in any way possible is a good idea. So 100% agree with the protesters on that one. Guarantee citizens' liberty by including in the Constitution a complete prohibition of state interference in their decisions concerning education, health, and family matters. Oh my God, that's like the most important thing that they've listed so far. Completely agree, especially in a state like California where they're mandating vaccines, and these vaccines have mercury, fluoride, aluminum, formaldehyde. I mean, all kinds of different neurotoxins and all kinds of hugely toxic adjuvants. That's, absolutely, people should be able to make their own choices regarding health, education, and family matters. That's so fundamental. That should be a basic human right internationally, not even just in each country, but internationally. And the fact that these big states like California and France are violating those human rights is just really egregious and atrocious. And I think in the future they're going to look at this time as like, they were forcing people to give their kids autism with these vaccines. You don't see a lot of 40 and 50-year-olds running around with diapers and helmets on, and that's because the vaccine schedule is super crazy now. We're literally injecting our kids until they're retarded. It's nuts. Yeah, so completely agree with the protesters on that one. No more planned obsolescence, mandate, guarantee from producers that their products will last 10 years and that spare parts will be available during that period. Yeah, that's a great idea. I'm not really sure how you would, I think it would be better if we had a more decentralized market where there was more different companies competing to sell superior products. That would be better. I mean, as it is, I don't know how many French automakers there are. There's Peugeot, right? Do they have another automaker? So, so of course, if they've only got one car maker over there or two car automakers or whatever, they're going to make crappy cars and make people buy them every 2 years, because they're not going to make a car that they're going to have to compete with later, right? So I think really opening up the market and breaking up the big corporations and the monopolies is the answer to that one. But okay. Ban plastic bottles and other polluting packaging. Yeah, well, that's a good idea to an extent. I'm wondering though what the motivation is there. I think it should be a human health issue. I mean, plastic bottles have BPA's in them, phthalates, other hormone disruptors, hugely toxic for human life, much less the rest of the wildlife on the planet. So yeah, again, I think we should just move away from the disposable culture altogether. And, but I think everybody should own their own farm and be canning their own fruits and vegetables and stuff. So probably not what these urban protesters had in mind, but that would be the real answer. Weaken the influence of big pharma on health in general and hospitals in particular. Yeah, again, this is big corporations is the problem here. You got to end these big giant corporations. That's all there is to it. Ban on GMO crops, carcinogenic pesticides, endocrine disruptors, and monocrops. Yeah, once again, big giant corporations are dominating the market. They have monopolies. They can decide to mass produce one crop of GMO garbage, and if 10% of the population gets cancer, oh well, we made money on that deal, and that's really what that's about. Is once again, this is another thing that's clearly they're not mentioning corporations in here, but they need to, because this is a corporate issue. We need to eliminate the corporations again. Clearly, that's what they actually want, but they're not saying it. Reindustrialize France, thereby reducing imports and thus pollution. Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with that. I think that everybody should be producing their own cars, their own televisions, their own cell phones, their own clothes. I don't think we should be relying on slave labor in the third world, where we're exploiting the very poorest and weakest people on the planet, so that we can, subsidize our products and throw them away at a faster rate. It's just, again, though, this is another direct thing that breaking up giant corporations and ending corporate monopolies and maybe just ending corporations altogether. If everything was a small family-owned business, you wouldn't be having these imports and pollution, a lot of these other things. In France's participation in foreign wars of aggression and exit from NATO. Yeah, yeah, again, this is another stab at meta government. NATO is another, anytime you've got a large government representing a bunch of people, I mean, quote representing, they're not actually representing the people, then they're going to be, using some of that money to go murder people in other countries and steal their resources. That's always what big governments do. And that's certainly the case with NATO and the UN and the EU as well. And that's certainly the case in the United States as well. So absolutely. Once again, they're talking about what really needs to happen is break up the large monolithic government into a smaller, more localized governments. And I completely agree with that. Decentralize all the things. Cease pillaging and interfering politically and militarily in Francafrique, which keeps Africa poor. Immediately repatriate all French soldiers. Establish relations with African states on an equal peer-to-peer basis. Yeah, duh. Once again, you've got this giant monolithic federal government out of control, exploiting, people in the third world, because that's what giant monolithic federal governments do. So yeah, break up your federal government. If I doubt any small county or province in France is going to be sending troops to invade Africa, because that's not, only giant federal governments do that kind of stuff. So yeah, into federal governments, prevent migratory flows that cannot be accommodated or integrated given the profound civilizational crisis we are experiencing. Yeah, again, they set themselves up for that hugely by living in a state that was going to absolutely, where everybody was living in such a crazy tax burden. And then, in a federal government that, doesn't represent the people. And then, then of course the federal government makes idiotic decisions like, hey, let's import, millions of people from the third world. It's like, obviously that's a nightmare scenario, but this is the globalist New World Order corporate agenda. And again, these people are fighting the globalists, they're fighting the New World Order, they're fighting the corporate agenda, but they should be a lot more clear about it. These are the corporations. They need to fight the corporations. They need to stop buying corporate products. They need to stop supporting corporations, stop working for corporations, only buy small family-owned businesses, goods, and services. That's the answer here. And I know that's not that easy of an answer when everybody's so married to their Nikes and their iPhones, but that's where we need to be. And that's where we all should be headed. So scrupulously respect international law and the treaties we have signed. Yeah, again, that's never going to happen when you've got a big monolithic federal government. So, you got to be realistic, and practical, because I love their list of demands. I love the fact that they're burning cars. I love the fact that they're building giant guillotines in the middle of the square, and that Macron had to flee the country, and, but again, the real enemy here is corporations, and they're not addressing that. They are kind of, with the too big to fail banks, corporation, right? Lobby groups, corporations, right? Let's see, big pharma, corporations, right? Cessation of privatization, that's corporations. They have an enemy that they could go after physically and destroy, and it's corporations, and they're not doing it. They're just complaining about, the government that the corporations inevitably are going to own when you live in a situation where governments own the corporations. Corporations own the governments. That's just, it's an inevitable outcome. So until you end all those corporations, until you stop supporting those corporations, until you decentralize your economy and make sure that small family-owned businesses are profitable and can compete in a fair, open, free market, which doesn't exist anywhere in the world right now. There is no free market. Everywhere is a corporate fascist, globalist nightmare. And the outcome of this in France is exactly what we all should have been expecting. And to make matters plain for us here in America, if Hillary had been elected, she would have agreed to those treaties. She would have imported a bunch of migrants, and we'd be burning cars here on the streets of America. We'd be in the same situation in France right now if Hillary had been elected. I strongly believe that. And again, I'm not a fan of Trump, but Hillary was, every bit as bad as Macron, if not worse. So, yeah. Anyway, French protesters keep protesting, but please name the enemy. The enemy is the corporations. Name the enemy. Go after the enemy. Destroy all the corporations. Replace every corporate everything with a small family-owned business. If you do that, you're going to solve 90% of this list. and then the 10% of it that you're not going to solve is, going to be a lot easier to deal with in that situation. So, all right, good luck, France. Vive la France.